I watched the neon sign of lakeside lanes flicker against the humid Ohio night, its buzzing hum a familiar backdrop to the ache radiating up my spine. My name is Brenda Vance. I'm 38 years old, and to the people who frequent this bowling alley every Saturday night, I'm nothing more than the quiet night shift cleaner in the oversized gray sweatshirt and the medical knee brace. They see a woman who moves with a slight limp, someone who wipes down grease-stained laminate tables, mops up spilled cheap beer, and empties overflowing trash cans without ever raising her eyes or raising her voice. They do not know about the freezing night in the Shecot Valley when a downed MH-47 Chinook heavy-lift helicopter was burning on an isolated razor-thin ridge at 10,000 feet, or how I spent 3 agonizing hours in the knee-deep snow pulling 6 men out of the burning aluminum wreckage while mortar rounds and heavy machine gun fire chewed up the mountain dirt around us. They do not know about the Air Force Pararescue badge sitting quietly in a dusty velvet box at the bottom of my hallway closet, or the sharp piece of steel shrapnel still embedded near my 4th lumbar vertebra that makes every single step feel like walking barefoot on broken glass. I left that life behind 4 years ago when a shattered rotor blade brought my military career to a sudden, violent end, leaving me with permanent double vision in my left eye, a ruined spinal column, and an honorable discharge that did not pay for the expensive specialized physical therapy I required every month. All I wanted was peace, a predictable daily routine, and the basic corporate health insurance policy provided by this minimum wage job to keep my medical treatment going. But peace is a fragile thing in small-town America, especially when you are surrounded by people who mistake silence for weakness and patience for submission. The bowling alley was packed to maximum capacity, the endless thunder of heavy plastic balls rolling down polished synthetic lanes, mixing with the deafening crash of pins and the pounding bass of 80s synth-pop music blasting from ceiling speakers. Over 50 local residents filled the wooden concourse lanes, shouting, drinking draft beer from plastic cups, and celebrating the arrival of the weekend. I worked my way down lane 7, pushing my yellow plastic cleaning cart with a slow, mechanical, deliberate rhythm that kept my weight evenly distributed. Every single time I bent my waist to pick up a discarded plastic cup or an empty basket of greasy fries, a sharp needle of fire shot straight through my lower back into my hip. But I kept my breathing slow and steady, relying on the tactical stress inoculation techniques drilled into me during my years in Tier 1 Special Operations. You acknowledge the physical sensation of pain, you lock it in an imaginary box, and you keep moving forward regardless of the discomfort. That was the rule in pararescue. And that was the rule I lived by every single night on the concrete floors of this bowling alley. That's when I heard him approaching behind me. Brody Tanner was 23 years old, built like a brick wall, and spent every waking second of his life ensuring everyone within earshot knew he was an amateur state kickboxing champion. He wore thin, fingerless athletic training gloves, even indoors, an unbuttoned athletic vest showing off his chest, and he carried a cheap painted plastic tournament trophy around the concourse like it was an Olympic gold medal. He lived exclusively for attention, thrived on performative cruelty, and treated anyone working an hourly customer service job as an obstacle meant to be mocked and humiliated for viral views. He was the quintessential suburban bully, raised with a trust fund and zero accountability, believing that his father's local business empire made him untouchable in this county. I watched out of the corner of my right eye as Brody walked over to a high-top table where a young family was enjoying their evening. With a wide, smug grin plastered across his face, he deliberately swept his right arm across the surface of the table, sending 3 glass beer bottles and a pitcher of soda crashing down onto the polished alley floor. Amber liquid and sharp glass shards exploded across the concrete walkway, splashing directly against the denim jeans and sneakers of a young mother holding a toddler. A collective horrified hush fell over the immediate surrounding area, but Brody just threw his head back and laughed loudly, flexing his biceps and winking for the camera phone his friend was pointing directly at his face. I pulled my yellow cleaning cart to a complete stop, squeezed the foam-covered handle until my knuckles turned bright white, and took a deep, controlled breath into my lungs. I retrieved the heavy corn-bristled broom and the metal dustpan from the side storage bracket of the cart and walked over toward the mess. I did not look directly at him. I did not make eye contact. I simply knelt down on the hard floor, my stiff right knee popping loudly against the medical brace under my sweatpants, and began sweeping the scattered glass shards into a tidy pile. "Look at this, fellas," Brody sneered, his booming voice cutting effortlessly over the sound of the arcade games and the music. "Hey guys, look at the garbage lady doing her trick. Faster, old woman. I need this walking path clear right now so I can show these casual bowling amateurs how a real high-performance athlete moves." I remained completely silent. I kept my head down and my eyes focused on the floor, carefully gathering the large, dangerous pieces of broken glass so no child would step on them through thin sneaker soles. "Hey, I'm talking to you, scrub," Brody shouted, stepping closer and bringing his heavy leather boot down with full force directly into my mop bucket. The dirty, soapy gray water surged violently over the plastic rim, spilling all across the walkway and soaking completely through my worn-out leather tactical boots, drenching my socks in ice-cold, dirty liquid. The sharp chill of the water soaked into my skin, but I stayed firmly on one knee. "Please step back, sir," I said softly, keeping my tone entirely neutral, flat, and professional. "It's a severe slip hazard for the other customers." "A slip hazard?" Brody laughed hysterically, turning around to face the camera phone held by his friend. "Did you all hear that on the stream? The washout janitor is trying to give me safety advice. Listen to me, you decrepit old piece of trash. I break things in this town, and you clean them up. That is the fundamental hierarchy of the entire world. You look up at me again with those dead, useless eyes, and I will personally walk over to the manager's office and make sure you are fired before midnight tonight. I know the owner of this entire commercial property personally. One single phone call from my father, and you will be sitting on the sidewalk with your trash bags." Losing this job did not just mean losing my low wage. It meant losing my employer-sponsored medical benefits. Without that health insurance, my specialized spinal physical therapy sessions would stop immediately, and within 6 months, the dense scar tissue wrapped around my lower spinal column would permanently degrade my mobility, leaving me confined to a wheelchair for the rest of my natural life. He knew he held absolute leverage over a vulnerable low-income worker with a bad back, and he was savoring every single microsecond of his perceived dominance. I slowly stood up from the wet floor, placing my left hand firmly against my lower back to support the intense, sharp spike of spinal pain that accompanied the movement. I looked him dead in the eye. Brody stepped directly into my personal space, his broad chest stopping mere inches from my face. He raised his heavy boot and deliberately brought it down onto my right hand as it rested on the wooden broom handle, grinding his full body weight into my bare knuckles against the wood. The pain was immediate, sharp and intense, crushing my flesh against the hard handle. His friend stepped closer with the smartphone camera, zooming in tightly on my face, waiting for the tears of pain, waiting for the desperate plea for mercy that would go viral on his social media page before the hour was out. "Say it," Brody whispered viciously, leaning his sweat-dripping face down until I could smell the stale IPA beer on his breath. "Say it clearly for the stream, or I start pressing down until I break your fingers one by one." Something deep inside my chest snapped cold and silent. The chaotic noise of the bowling alley began to fade away into a distant, muffled hum. The bright neon lights overhead blurred into the dark, freezing expanse of my military memories. When you spend over 10 years of your life in the United States Air Force as a special tactics pararescue operator, your brain is rewired to analyze human threat vectors under extreme stress conditions that would induce total panic in an untrained civilian. Brody Tanner thought he was cornering and intimidating an impoverished, helpless middle-aged woman with a bad back. He had no way of knowing that he was standing 18 inches away from a trained military operative who had survived 3 catastrophic helicopter crashes, cleared enemy-occupied compounds in total darkness, and held open arterial wounds closed with her bare fingers while taking heavy enemy small arms fire. I didn't flinch, I didn't wince, I didn't scream or plead. I simply stared back into his eyes, my baseline heart rate actually dropping from 80 beats per minute down to a cold, calm, razor-sharp 60. In my mind, the bowling alley completely vanished. I was no longer in suburban Ohio. I was back on a freezing mountain ridge in the Shahikot Valley in March of 2018. The deafening, earth-shaking roar of the twin turbine engines of our MH-47 Chinook was ringing in my ears. The air was frigid, thick with the choking stench of burning aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and cooked-off ammunition. We had taken heavy rocket-propelled grenade fire from 3 hardened enemy positions carved into the rock face. The helicopter was resting at a 45-degree tilt against a jagged cliff wall, its massive rotor blades disintegrating as they struck the solid rock wall at high speed. I was suspended upside down by my safety harness, hot blood streaming down into my left eye from a deep scalp laceration caused by flying shrapnel. My team leader was pinned under a collapsed steel bulkhead, his ribcage visibly crushed, coughing up bright red foam into his flight helmet. "Vance," he screamed over the emergency intercom static, "get the hydraulic shears. Cut me free before the fuel cell blows." With my right hand holding on to a dangling steel hoist cable to prevent myself from falling 300 feet into the rocky ravine below, I operated the heavy 70-pound hydraulic cutting tool with my left hand alone, slicing through reinforced steel support struts while enemy 7.62 rounds punched neat rows of holes through the thin aluminum fuselage right above my helmeted head. I didn't feel the sub-zero temperature. I didn't feel the warm blood running down my nose. I didn't feel the agonizing tearing sensation in my lumbar spine as the metal structure finally gave way and I caught his full 220-pound gear-laden weight with my left arm, hauling him up into the rescue harness just as the secondary starboard fuel cell detonated into a massive fireball. That was real life-and-death combat. That was true violence. Brody Tanner was just an insecure child playing with matches inside a room full of military-grade high explosives. I snapped back to the present reality instantly. Brody was still pressing his boot heel into my knuckles, grinning wildly for his smartphone screen. "What's the matter, Grandma? Did you forget how to speak English, or are you about to cry on live camera?" "You have 5 seconds to remove your boot from my hand." My voice was not raised, but it possessed a flat, dead, terrifying quality that caused his friend holding the smartphone to lower the camera by 2 inches, an instinctive reflex of survival kicking in. "Or what, old woman?" sneered Brody, pulling his boot back and immediately winding up a broad, sweeping right haymaker aimed directly at my left jawline. He put his entire athletic weight and hip turn behind the punch, expecting my head to snap back, expecting an instant knockout that would solidify his internet reputation as a tough fighter. He was undeniably fast for an amateur state kickboxer, but his mechanical telegraphing was painfully obvious to anyone with real tactical combat experience. He shifted his stance, loaded his hip, and dropped his shoulder long before his right glove ever left his waist level. To a trained special operator, a street-style haymaker moves in absolute slow motion. I didn't panic. I didn't step back. I executed a classic, instinctive CQC frame and parry technique. As his right fist came flying toward my jaw, I stepped forward into his strike zone, driving my body weight inside his punch radius to deny him his leverage. My left forearm drove upward like a steel girder, forming a rigid 45-degree frame that intercepted his incoming wrist, deflecting the tremendous momentum of his own wild strike harmlessly over my left shoulder. The tremendous momentum of his own wild strike pulled his upper body off balance, breaking his center of gravity. Before he could re-establish his stance, my right hand darted downward like the strike from a viper, hooking deeply behind his left knee joint, while my left shoulder slammed violently into his midsection. It was a textbook military single-leg takedown, executed with flawless mechanical geometry. Brody swept completely off his feet with a loud, terrified gasp of air, his legs flying high into the air. He crashed flat onto the hard, polished wooden floor with a bone-rattling thud that reverberated across the entire length of the bowling alley. The surrounding crowd erupted in a collective gasp. The distant sound of bowling balls hitting pins ceased entirely. A complete, unnatural silence fell over the concourse of lakeside lanes. Brody scrambled backward on his back, his face bright red with a mixture of physical shock and intense psychological humiliation. "You crazy old bitch!" he screamed, his fragile athletic ego totally shattered in front of 50 local witnesses and his live online viewing audience. He rolled onto his stomach, pushed off the floor with explosive athletic power, sprang to his feet, and threw a vicious razor-sharp horizontal elbow strike targeted directly at my left temple. I saw the strike coming, but as I attempted to pivot my weight away from the trajectory, my lower back locked up completely. A massive, excruciating muscle spasm seized my lumbar vertebrae, slowing my defensive evasion by a critical fraction of a second. The hard point of his elbow grazed across my left temple. Pain exploded like a flashbang inside my skull. Blood immediately welled up from a deep split tear near my hairline, thick and warm, running down my cheek and dripping off my chin on the front of my oversized gray sweatshirt. The tremendous kinetic impact knocked me sideways, causing my pre-existing double vision to flare up violently in my left eye. 2 distinct images of Brody appeared in my distorted field of view, both of them lunging forward to pin me down onto the floor. "Yeah, stay down on the trash where you belong," Brody screamed, pressing his advantage, dropping his knee toward my chest to begin a ground-and-pound assault. Blood was pouring into my eye, exactly like that night in the Shahikot Valley. The familiar copper taste of blood filled my mouth. The injury in my spine burned like an open blast furnace. But in high-stress tactical warfare, physical pain is never an obstacle. It is merely real-time operational data. It tells you your nerve pathways are still functional. It tells you you are still alive, still breathing, and still in the fight. Instead of fighting his momentum, I dropped flat onto my back on the hardwood floor, drawing his overcommitted body weight directly into my guard. As Brody dropped his hips to deliver a heavy downward punch to my face, my hands moved with mechanical precision, forged over thousands of hours of rigorous hand-to-hand combat training at elite military facilities. I grabbed his left wrist with both hands, completely isolating his limb. I rotated my hips with explosive lateral force, throwing my left leg high over his shoulder and snaking my right leg under his armpit. I locked my ankles firmly behind his upper back, securing a tight overhook frame. In one seamless, mechanical, terrifyingly smooth motion, I peeled his trapped arm backward, twisting his shoulder joint far past its natural anatomical limit, while securing his neck between my thighs. It was a combined Kimura shoulder lock and a modified tactical rear naked choke designed specifically for combat survival against physically superior opponents. Brody tried to yank his arm free, but he was completely immobilized. The harder he pulled and thrashed, the more intense levered pressure was applied directly to his shoulder socket and rotator cuff. I adjusted my hip angle by half an inch, sinking my left forearm deep into his carotid artery, instantly restricting the oxygenated blood flow to his brain. "Tap your hand or your shoulder detaches," I whispered directly into his ear, my voice flat, cold, and entirely devoid of human mercy. Brody panicked completely. The arrogant suburban athlete who had been bragging and tormenting a cleaner 30 seconds ago was now making high-pitched wheezing noises, his eyes bulging with genuine existential terror. He realized in that single terrifying second that the woman he had kicked, humiliated, and threatened was not a helpless victim. She was an elite military predator who had deliberately chosen not to break him until he forced her hand.
"Tap out," his friend screamed, dropping the smartphone onto the floor. "Brody, tap out right now! She's breaking your arm!" Brody raised his trembling right hand and slapped the wooden floorboards hard 3 times. I tap! Jesus Christ, let go of me!" I held the joint lock and choke for 3 full seconds after the tap, just long enough for hypoxia to set in slightly and ensure his primitive brain fully comprehended the absolute terrifying disparity in our combat capabilities, before smoothly releasing his head and arm and sliding backward into a low defensive combat kneel. Brody flopped onto his side like a landed fish, clutching his dislocated shoulder, gasping violently for air, and hyperventilating as he stared up at me with eyes filled with pure terror. He looked like he was looking at a ghost. He couldn't speak. He couldn't stand up. The bowling alley remained in dead, heavy silence. Every single customer and staff member stood frozen, staring at the scene in absolute disbelief. I reached up with the sleeve of my gray sweatshirt, wiped the warm blood from my left eye, and slowly stood up. My lower back throbbed with an excruciating white-hot ache, but my posture was straight, rigid, and strictly military. I did not say a single word to Brody Tanner. I did not throw a single insult or look at him with disdain. I walked calmly over to my yellow cleaning cart, grabbed a fresh roll of industrial paper towels, knelt back down on the floor, and began meticulously wiping up the blood and spilled beer from the wooden walkway. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the entire world had shifted.
The live stream recorded by Brody's friend had gone viral across multiple social media platforms before he had even realized he needed to delete it. Over 4 million people had watched the 23-year-old self-proclaimed kickboxing champion get effortlessly dismantled and submitted on the floor of a public bowling alley by a middle-aged night janitor in a knee brace. The internet commentary was relentless, brutal, and unforgiving. Within 12 hours of the video going viral, the State Athletic Commission issued an emergency suspension of Brody's amateur fighting license, citing unprovoked physical assault on a civilian. His private training gym released an official public statement terminating his membership immediately and banning him from their facilities for life, citing a complete breach of their professional code of conduct. His athletic career, his public reputation, and his ego were completely destroyed in less than 24 hours. I didn't care about his online humiliation. I was sitting on the edge of my small bed in my single-bedroom apartment on Sunday afternoon, pressing a cold ice pack against my swollen, bruised left temple and wrapping a reinforced lumbar compression brace tightly around my spine. I knew how the world worked. Men like Brody Tanner, raised in wealth and unearned privilege, do not accept public humiliation gracefully. They do not learn lessons. They use the only real weapon they possess: money, power, and legal harassment. At precisely 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I walked into the main administrative office at Lakeside Lanes to face whatever was coming. Sitting behind the manager's mahogany desk was not my floor manager, but a man in his mid-50s wearing a tailor-made three-piece navy suit. He had slicked-back gray hair, expensive gold rings on his fingers, and an expression of pure, unadulterated arrogance etched into his face. This was Richard Tanner, Brody's father, the founder and principal owner of Tanner Development Group, a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate firm that owned half the retail space in the county. My floor manager was standing quietly in the corner of the room, looking pale, sweating, and completely terrified. Richard Tanner didn't bother offering me a chair. He leaned back in the high-backed leather chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked down his nose at me as I limped slowly into the room with my visible black eye and my stiff knee. "So, you are the janitor," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension and cold hatred. "Your son assaulted me, Mr. Tanner," I replied calmly, keeping my hands folded neatly behind my lower back in a formal parade rest stance. "I neutralized an active physical threat." Richard let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the office walls. "Neutralize a threat. Listen to yourself talk, you delusional trash. You are a night shift floor sweeper making $15 an hour without a dime to your name. You broke my son's shoulder joint and completely ruined his athletic standing in this state. Do you have any idea who I am in this town? I own this entire commercial complex. I own the land beneath the concrete you sweep every night. I have 5 high-priced corporate attorneys on retainer who will tear your life apart piece by piece. By the time I'm finished with you, you won't just be fired without unemployment benefits. You will be facing felony aggravated assault charges with a hate crime enhancement. I will personally ensure you spend the next 5 to 8 years in a state penitentiary, and you won't see a single cent of your medical coverage ever again." He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a typed legal document, and slid it aggressively across the desk toward me. "Or," he leaned forward and tapped the paper with his gold ring, or you sign this document right here and right now. It is a full, legally binding confession stating that you suffered an unprovoked psychotic episode and violently attacked my son without cause. You resign immediately, you waive all rights to file workers' compensation or lawsuits, and you agree to move out of this county within 30 days. If you sign it right now, I might decide not to completely crush whatever miserable existence you have left. I looked down at the legal document resting on the polished wood desk, then raised my eyes and looked directly into Richard Tanner's arrogant face. Before I could open my mouth to respond, the heavy wooden door of the manager's office swung wide open without a preliminary knock. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate navy suit stepped authoritatively into the room. He had silver hair at his temples, sharp blue eyes, and an air of confidence. Steel gray eyes, and carried himself with the unquestioned, absolute command of someone who had led thousands of troops in active war zones. Flanking him on either side were two broad-shouldered men in dark charcoal suits wearing clear tactical earpieces. Richard Tanner instantly stood up from the leather chair, his arrogant expression evaporating into a nervous, eager smile. "Senator Hayes? Sir, what an unexpected honor! What on earth are you doing in a bowling alley administration office in this district? My office wasn't informed that your Regional Economic Infrastructure Oversight Committee was visiting until late next month." United States Senator Marcus Hayes didn't even acknowledge Richard Tanner's presence. His sharp gray eyes swept across the room until they locked directly onto me. His eyes widened slightly, and a warm, profound smile broke across his rugged face. He walked right past Richard Tanner, stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, brought his boots together, stood at rigid military attention, and delivered a crisp, flawless military salute. "Chief Warrant Officer Vance," Senator Hayes said, his deep voice echoing through the small office. "It has been far too long, Chief." I immediately brought my right hand up to my brow, executing a sharp, perfect military return salute, despite the throbbing stiffness in my shoulder and neck. "Senator Hayes, it's good to see you walking upright, sir." Richard Tanner froze mid-step, his jaw dropping open in total, unadulterated shock. "Senator, excuse me, but you know this janitor?" Senator Hayes slowly turned his head toward Richard Tanner, his warm smile vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, deadly gaze that had terrified hostile commanders across 2 continents. "This janitor," Senator Hayes said, his voice dropping an octave into a low, terrifying growl, "is Chief Warrant Officer Brenda Vance. She was the primary pararescue operator on my recovery team in the Shahikot Valley when my transport helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines in 2018. When my chest was crushed, my spine was fractured, and our position was completely surrounded by 40 enemy combatants, Chief Vance refused explicit orders to withdraw to safety. She pulled my broken body 300 yards across open snow under direct heavy machine gun fire, lifted me into a rescue helicopter with her own spine severely damaged, and saved my life. She was awarded the Air Force Cross for her heroics that morning." Richard Tanner went completely white, every single trace of color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse standing in an expensive suit. "Now," Senator Hayes continued, taking 2 slow, deliberate steps toward Richard Tanner and leaning heavily over the mahogany desk, "let me explain something very clearly to you about how power actually works in this state, Mr. Tanner. As you may know, I serve as the chairman of the State Infrastructure and Commercial Zoning Committee, I believe your firm, Tanner Development Group, currently has 3 massive commercial zoning applications pending my committee's final administrative approval for your $30 million riverfront development project. Richard swallowed hard, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the edge of the desk for support. Yes, Senator. We have invested over $4 million of private capital into those permit applications over the last 2 years. They are denied, flatly, permanently. Furthermore, as of 10 minutes ago, I have formally requested a comprehensive state audit of every single tax filing, building safety compliance record, environmental impact study, and municipal labor contract your firm has executed in this state over the last 15 years. If my investigators find even a single mislaid dollar, an uninspected electrical panel, or a single labor violation, I will personally see to it that the State Attorney General revokes your corporate license and files criminal fraud charges against you. Richard felt his legs give out beneath him. He slumped hard into the leather chair, sweat pouring down his forehead, soaking his silk tie. "Senator, please, you can't do this. This is a complete misunderstanding. My son, Brody, he didn't know who she was. He was just acting reckless." "Your son is a pathetic, arrogant bully because you raised him to believe that money and social status make him superior to the working men and women who build, maintain, and protect this country," Senator Hayes said with cold disgust. "And you genuinely believed you could use your financial leverage to crush a true American war hero who has sacrificed her health and her body for this nation, while your family sat comfortably in air-conditioned country clubs." Senator Hayes turned back to face me, his stern face immediately softening into genuine warmth and concern. "Brenda, I have been searching for you through the Veterans Affairs database for over 2 years. When the military medical referral system lost track of your specialized physical therapy funding, I had my chief of staff run a federal trace. I arrived in town 2 hours ago and saw that viral video circulating on the news networks. Are you truly all right?" "I'm functional, sir," I replied softly, a faint smile touching my lips. "Just another unexpected operational engagement on the night shift." Richard Tanner suddenly scrambled out of the leather chair, dropping hard onto his knees on the carpet right beside the desk. The powerful, multimillionaire real estate mogul was weeping openly, clutching his hands together in a desperate, pathetic plea for mercy. "Chief Vance, Miss Vance, please, I am begging you on my knees," Richard sobbed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "I will pay for everything. I will cover every single dollar of your medical bills, pay for the best private physical therapy specialists in the country, pay you a lifetime monthly stipend, whatever you demand. I will bring Brody here right now, and I will force him to kneel on this floor and apologize to you in front of every employee in this building. Just please, I beg you, ask the senator not to destroy my family business." I looked down at the man kneeling and weeping on the carpet. 10 minutes ago, he was prepared to destroy my life, strip away my health care, and throw me into a state prison without a second thought, using his money as a heavy hammer against someone he assumed was completely defenseless. Now, stripped of his illusion of control, he was nothing more than a frightened coward facing the real consequences of his actions. I didn't feel anger toward him. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive triumph. I simply felt a deep, quiet, unwavering sense of justice restored to the world. "I don't care to see your business destroyed, Mr. Tanner," I said calmly, looking down at him. "I want you to legally guarantee full payment for all of my medical treatments and physical therapy expenses for the rest of my life through an irrevocable trust fund. I want a formal written public apology from your son, published on the front page of the county newspaper. And I want you to make a $200,000 non-refundable donation to the local Disabled American Veterans Support Chapter in this county." Richard looked up, tears streaming down his flushed face, nodding his head frantically. "Yes, yes, absolutely. I will have my corporate legal team draft the binding contracts today. Every single term will be met immediately." "And one last thing," I added, turning my eyes to my floor manager, who was still cowering in the corner of the room. "I am resigning from my position at Lakeside Lanes, effective right now." Senator Hayes smiled broadly, stepping forward and placing a heavy, supportive hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Brenda. My charitable foundation has been actively searching for a director of veteran medical operations. It comes with a full executive salary, top-tier comprehensive health coverage, and you will spend your days ensuring wounded service members get the exact medical care and respect they earned. Let's get you out of this place." I walked out through the glass doors of Lakeside Lanes and stepped into the crisp, bright Ohio morning sunlight. The air was cool and refreshing, the sky was a deep, clear blue, and for the first time in 4 long years, the excruciating weight resting on my shoulders finally felt manageable. I rolled up the sleeves of my oversized gray sweatshirt, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun on my skin, knowing that no matter how deep you hide your strength under a quiet exterior, true honor and unyielding resolve will always find a way back into the light.